Hey guys, this is Mark. This is the first video in a whole series of videos we're putting together dedicated to a new feature in Backendless called UI Builder. UI Builder is a part of Backendless 6, which will be released very soon. So this will be sort of a teaser just to demonstrate what UI Builder is and how to build applications with it. UI Builder is more than just a feature. It's a complete system that lets you build user interface and wire it to the backend, so it works with a database, with a messaging system, with user registration and logins and all of it. The concept is fairly simple. We took the no-code approach where we use codeless system that makes it easier for you to create any kind of logic that now runs in the browser. So previously codeless was strictly for business logic on the server. Now the same codeless, we have enriched it with functionality that makes sense in the browser. And if you're familiar with codeless, you can start using it to build user interface applications. There will be plenty more videos because we want everything related to UI Builder to be visual. So the whole concept of documentation for UI Builder is going to be all visual, mostly through the videos. In this video, I will demonstrate how to build a very simple to-do application. And to-do applications, there are plenty of them. And the reason I wanted to do to-do with UI Builder is because it touches on a lot of different use cases that are core to building other applications. So there goes retrieval of the data from the database and visualizing it on the screen, creating new data items, new to-do items, editing them, such as marking whether it's done or it is not complete, deleting them. So all of those use cases, they are sort of compressed in that simple to-do application. My goal is to build this application in less than 10 minutes. Maybe I can do it much faster. We'll see. I haven't tried it yet in a whole just one set, so that will be interesting. I will be recording as I go, so you can see how to work with UI Builder, what it looks like, the kind of things that it can do, how the binding between the UI components and the backend works, and I hope you will get intrigued and you will start building your user interface applications with the UI Builder. What kind of apps can you build with UI Builder? It is general purpose, so you can build pretty much any kind of app. We have built chat applications, we have built an Instagram clone. There you go, here's going to be a to-do little app. We tried to build a blog system, a CMS system, websites. All of those are possible. And keep in mind, this is going to be our very first release, so we will actually be listening and making it better because we will need your feedback. I hope you are going to be just as excited about UI Builder as I am, because it took us quite some time. We started working on UI Builder quite some time ago, and now we believe it is ready for the initial release. So I will be switching to Backendless Console. We're in version 6 now, and we will start building that to-do application. I hope you will enjoy this video. Thank you. So we are in Backendless Console now. There is a brand new app called To Do. The database is empty. There is no business logic, so it basically just comes out completely blank. And you will see that the console in version 6 looks identical as in the previous version, except now at the top there is a section called Front End. And that's where UI Builder is. Before we jump to UI Builder, since this is a to-do app and we need to have something in the database, let's set up the backend and just have it there, because the way I'm going to structure this video is I will focus on basically CRUD, create, retrieve, update, delete, for basic and fundamental functions of any data-driven application. And the very first use case is going to be retrieve. So in order to handle that particular use case, we need to have some data in a database. And let's create our table. It will be called task. And in this table, we're going to configure schema. The schema is going to be very simple. There is going to be a column called name, which will contain the name of the to-do item. Notice that there's a checkbox that says create another if you want to create multiple columns. So select this checkbox, click create. the name column is created, and the next column is going to be done, which will indicate whether that to-do item is done or not. The default value is false because by default, when you create a new to-do item, it is not done. The schema is configured, 2 columns, and let's set up some sample data. We will need it just to start testing. So let's say it's going to be shopping and cleaning. So the data is there, and now let's switch to UI Builder and start building our application. Whenever you create a new app, you always get this page that is called landing. You can create other pages if you move the mouse over this area right here, so you can see that you can create a new page if needed. For now, this application will have just one page that will contain all the logic. Select the header and the title, change the content to my tasks. Now, in order to render all the to-do items in my list, we need to have some sort of list component or container. When you click on this icon right here, you get the toolbox of all the components available in Backendless UI Builder. The one we are going to use is called container, and you will see why. So drag it right into the page. The container consists of a row, and then when you select a component in the UI Builder, you see right here in the corner, it tells you what that component is. So the container has a row, and that row has one cell. You can add multiple cells. In our application, it's going to be just one cell because it will be sufficient. By the way, select the container and let's give it an ID. We will call it to-do list, and you will see why I did it. It will be referenced in our logic. The way a container works is it has a property called dynamic list behavior selected. This is sort of kind of a magical property, and the way it works is that when we assign objects to that container, to that to-do list, for every single object in that collection, the row will be replicated to render the contents of those individual objects. So when dynamic list behavior for the to-do list is selected, then the row itself becomes a template of how individual objects need to be rendered. Cell is where we're going to be placing our components, and in order to render an individual to-do item, we will use the checkbox component. So drag it and put it into the cell. Checkbox is convenient because it contains both a label, which will have the value of our to-do item, and the checkbox itself, which will indicate whether the item is done or not done. At this point, this is going to be the template. We will make it prettier as we go, and of course we will be adding additional logic to delete individual items, to update them, and so on. Now, the logic for assigning data to this to-do list, to that container, needs to be somewhere. And in UI Builder, all the logic is done using Codeless, and you will see in a second how it works. But take a look. Whenever you select any one of these components, there is going to be like this little toolbox, I guess, or tool panel, and one of them, it has this jigsaw puzzle, which is switch to the logic section, this one. But whenever you click on that jigsaw puzzle, you will be switching to the Codeless section in the context of whatever component you came from. So if I have checkbox and I click here, then I will get Codeless specifically with all the events for checkbox. If I select to-do list and go to Codeless, of course, that's going to be all the events for the to-do list. Now, the one that I'm interested in at this point is going to be the code list for the page itself. So I selected page, you see it says page, and then this is going to be the code list. Why page? Well, because the page events, and let me go there, include, as you can see, page enter, page leave, page scroll. So page enter event happens whenever that page is loaded. And right at this point, we want to retrieve data from the database and assign it to our to-do list. How does it work in Codeless? Let me show you. You click on the green button to add logic. And this is our Codeless logic that is executed when the page is being entered, when the page is loaded. And in here, we go to the Backendless section, and the data API contains multiple blocks. The one that we want is load table objects. The table name is task. But you can see it actually returns data. That data needs to go somewhere. And where it needs to go to the to-do list component. And in the UI library section, see the dynamic list. One of the blocks says set dynamic list items to. Drag this guy, put it into page enter, and connect load table objects. That's it. That's all it takes. And the way you would read this logic is load table objects, and then whatever the result is, put it into the to-do list. This is a special block that is aware of all the dynamic list containers in your page. And since there is only one that is called to-do list, of course it is selected, but that's the logic that we're going to have. And that's all it takes to assign data to our to-do list. Let me pause here for a second and walk you through an important concept that exists in UI Builder. So let's say we have a server and we have UI built with UI Builder, and it has a data list component, and that component is going to render information coming from the server. So the server returns information into the UI, where UI makes an API call, gets the data, and the question is, how do we get the data into the data list component? An important thing to understand is that most of the components in UI Builder, they have a model. So in this case, we have this list data model. And what is a model? It really is just an object that represents the data, represents, in this case, an array of objects, where each individual object will be representing a record or an item in that data list. So the data list uses the model to get the data that it needs to render. So with that, let's continue building our to-do application. So at this point, if I run this page, just open up in the browser, and I'll show you in a second how to do it. What we are going to have is that there will be 2 rows with this content. Of course, the checkbox label will stay there because we haven't done anything to render our data. At this point, we're just retrieving it and assigning to the container. There is in the corner, upper right corner, there is a preview panel, and to preview on the desktop, right in the browser, click this button. Page opens up, and as you can see, there are 2 rows. In fact, if I go to inspect and open up network and reload this page, you will see that there is going to be a request to Backendless. So this is the API that brings back our to-do items. Okay, so these items were assigned to the container, and now we have 2 rows. So now let's work on actually displaying the value of the to-do item in these checkboxes. In order to do this, click checkbox and then go to codeless. And in here, these are all the events that can occur on the checkbox component. What we are going to do is rather than adding codeless logic, you can actually control data binding here. And data binding is an extremely important concept in UI Builder. First of all, let me configure the data binding. So the label is going to be name, and the check state is going to be done. So what we are doing here, we're actually mapping properties of the objects that come back. And let me just go back to this page, do inspect, and in the network, we will take a look at what those properties are. So take a look at individual objects. You see there is a property called done that indicates whether this to-do item is done or not, and there is a property called name. So by using this data binding here, we're essentially saying take whatever the value in the name property and bind it to the label. And then here, take whatever the value is in the done property and bind it to the visualization of the checkbox. That's all it takes. So now if we go back to user interface, by the way, UI Builder automatically saves all the changes. There is no save button. So now if we go back to our page, and I'm going to change the browser to be a little bit smaller, just reload this page. At this point, you see it becomes cleaning and shopping. So now we already have visualization of the to-do list in our application. Close the browser. By the way, if I go back to backend and mark one of them as done. So let's say cleaning is going to be true, so it is done. And by going to the front end, if I open it up in the browser, you see cleaning, there is a checkbox that it's done. So this data binding is magical, because all you need to do is just to connect the state of that component, in this case the checkbox, and we connected the label, we connected the checkbox with the property of an object, and it automatically is there. So in here we already covered the use case of retrieval data from the database and rendering it on the page. You could have right now we have only 2 objects, but if there were more than 2, of course you would get additional rows with exactly the same content. Let's spend a little bit of time just to make it a little bit prettier. So for this cell, first of all, we can change the width to be full width, so it's all the way. And under dimension, we're going to check if there are any margins. So on the cell itself, there is some padding, so we can get rid of that just to make it a little bit more compact. Okay. There is also minimum height. We can get rid of that. Now, if we refresh, it's going to be automatically more compact. There you go. So now it looks a little bit better. The next task that we will explore is the actual update. So we know we can retrieve data. Now let's work on updating data, meaning that when we click on the checkbox, we want to change the state of that object in the database. So we want to save the fact that the particular task is done or not done just by manipulating the checkbox. How does it work in Codeless? Well, very easy. Click this checkbox and then go to Codeless. And here, by default, it shows all the event handlers, all the bindings that you have, but you can click Show Handlers Without Logic, and then here we get everything. Notice that there is an onChange event, and that's the one that is fired whenever you click on that checkbox. So let's add logic to it. So this is the onChange event. In here, what we want to do is we want to save that object, because if the checkbox is checked, we want to send it back to the database. And to do this, we go to the data section and then save object in backendless. The table name is task. And then the object that we'll be saving is row 1 data. That's all it takes. Now, you might be asking, well, how does it work? So I click on the checkbox. Where does the data go? Why is this row 1 data here? What is it doing? Well, row 1 data is actually a task object that came from the database and is assigned to our to-do list. And each individual row gets its own object that it's working with. Okay, remember when I showed you in here what we get from the server, those were individual objects. So row 1 data in this Codeless block represents a specific object. Whenever you click on the checkbox, then because of this assignment, okay, because of this data binding, the done property in row 1 data, which is going to be the actual to-do item, will be updated. So if I select the checkbox, then the done property will be true. If I deselect the checkbox, then the done property is going to be false. So this way, this row 1 data is already an updated object that we just want to flush to the database. Now let's go back to our page, reload it, and in here let's just click, and by the way, we can just open the inspect so we see the network traffic. Click on shopping, and you see it, there is a request that goes to the server to save this object, and done is true. So, and at this point both are done. And if we go back to the database just to check the state, and you see cleaning and shopping both are true. And then in here, if I deselect, there are 2 additional API requests going to the database, and then see it now in the database, it is both are false. So here we already covered the use case of updating this object in the database. The next one is going to be deletion. So we want to be able to delete that object from the database. In order to do this, I will get a button and add this button to my cell right here. So this button, and the label will be delete. Okay. If this is the template, it's not going to be very pretty because as you can see, if I reload this page, then we're going to have this kind of ugly delete buttons. Okay, so let's change the layout a little bit. Select the cell, and notice that in the cell we have a bunch of configurations that you can actually play with to change the layout of the cell. And in this case, the layout is top to bottom, and we want to change it from left to right. Okay, so here it is, left to right. Select the cell, and we put it like this. So just select the justify, so the components are on the opposite side. And that will make it a little bit prettier. By the way, this button has some margins that we can remove just to make it a little bit more compact again. Okay, so does the checkbox have any margins? I think I already checked that. No, it doesn't. And by the way, the cell, we want to make sure that it's all centered. Okay, now it's much better. Let's reload the page. And as you can see, every row has its own delete button. By the way, whenever you are in UI Builder, there are modes here for desktop, for tablet, for phone. When you click on it, you can actually make the changes as to how it is going to be rendered for different devices. So in this case, for tablet, select the cell itself and specify the width. There you go, width, full width. And so as you can see, now it looks much better for all three different form factors. So let's go back to the delete. So here's the delete button, and the delete button also has its own codeless block. Click on it, and as you can see, there is a click event, add logic for click, and in here we're making the call to the database, data API. There's going to be a block to delete object in the database. I think already, here it is, delete table object. The table name is task, and the object we want to delete, exactly, row 1 data. So that's the object that is the data assigned to that row. Okay, so what this will do is it will send an API call to backend list to remove the object associated with the current row from the database. But we actually need to remove it from the UI as well, okay? And that doesn't happen automatically. So we need to add logic to delete it from the UI. And in order to do this, what we are going to do is this. In the dynamic list, we can set dynamic list items to to-do list. And what we need to do is we need to go through all the objects in that collection and delete the one that is being deleted right here. Okay, how will this work? Just let me add the logic and I will walk you through what is actually happening in here. Okay, so that's the logic. It may sound kind of gibberish or not very clear as to what's going on, but I will walk you through and it will start making perfect sense. First of all, we get all the objects from the to-do list. Okay, one of them is being deleted. We need to find which one and we need to remove it from that collection. And in order to do this, we use this filter items block, which is basically a loop. It iterates over every single object in this collection. And then every single object is going to be subject to a test. So we check if the current item, which is this to-do item in this collection, equals the one that the one that is being deleted. Then return null, which means to exclude it from filtering. Otherwise, if it is not equal, return this current item. Whatever the final collection is, assign it back to the to-do list. So this way, the item that is being deleted is being removed from the dynamic list items collection. So let's test how this works. Reload the page. Okay, and click delete. Now it's gone. And if we take a look in the database, now it has only one task. Let's just add workout so we have more to work with. All right, so let's try deleting. Let me just open up the network traffic so you can see exactly what's going on. And let's just delete cleaning. All right, so here's the delete request, and it is also deleted from the UI. Okay, so at this point we covered data retrieval, update, and deletion. And the remaining one is creating items. Okay, and creating items will work exactly the same way, but there is going to be some little trickery as far as just how we do it in the UI. The way I want to do it is I will add a button to my page right here, and that button will say add task. Okay, the width of this button, I'm not too happy about it. I want to make it so width is auto. Let's say it's going to be 200 pixels. Okay, and the left margin, I don't really need it. Just set it to 0. Okay, so when this button is clicked, I want a form to show up. In that form, I will type in the name of my task, press return, and that task needs to be added to the database and displayed in my list. Let's work on adding that form. In our toolbox, there is a form component. You can add individual elements, but I want to use the form component because it has an event when the form is being submitted. When you press enter on the input, the form will be submitted. So drag this form out here, and then the form that you add has a bunch of other stuff, which we don't really need 95% of it. Okay, so let's just clean out and remove individual components that are here that we don't need, and then this one we will use. And rather than first name, new task name is going to be the label. Okay, and then on the form we can remove the height, we can remove the padding on the bottom, we can also remove all of these paddings as well, just to make it once again more compact. Okay, so here's our input component. And by the way, when we go to Codeless, since it was a pre-built form, when we go to Codeless, there's going to be data binding that we're going to remove it. And so at this point, the form is there, but we don't want this form to be visible when the application starts, because it needs to be visible only when we click on the add task. So select the form. Let's give it a name, new task form. Okay, and we can remove the display so it is not displayed. Let's take a look at what it looks like at this point. All right, so we have add task, we have our task, and let's add the logic. When the button is clicked, the form shows up. So select the button, go to Codeless, and then on click event, we want to change the visibility of our form. In the component category, section under UI library, there is a toggle component visibility, and we want to toggle visibility of the new task form, set it to visible. Okay, so when the button is clicked, this is going to be executed. Let's check how that works. Click the button, form shows up. Okay, which is exactly what we wanted. Now we want to be able to hide this form and then add the logic of when the user submits the form, so the data is sent to the server. In order to hide this form on demand, we can add, by the way, I want to return some paddings here. I think that will look a little bit better. Okay, so we can add a component that is going to be an icon. Trying to see where icon is. Here it is. Add it to the form. And this icon will change to be close icon, this one. All right. And what we want is we want this icon to appear right next to this input. Okay, but for the form, we don't really have an ability to change the layout as to how the items in that form are laid out. So what we are going to do is we will add a block inside of that form and then move this input into the block and move icon into the block. And for the block itself, then we can change the layout, which will be like this. We're going to make the width 100%. Okay, so now this looks exactly how I envisioned. So for this icon, whenever it is clicked, we want to hide the entire form. So on click event for the icon, we're going to change visibility of the form to be invisible. False. Okay, let's reload the page and test this functionality. So click add task and then click on the icon. So this works exactly how I wanted it to work. So the only thing that we need to add at this point is the logic of when the form is submitted. Okay, before we get to this part of the logic on submission of the form, okay, which will be like, for instance, I selected the form, go to Codeless, and on the form there is an onSubmit event. But before we get there, there is going to be a very important step. So I selected this input, and if I go to Codeless, there is going to be data binding on the value. Okay, and the data binding on the value is a very important thing, because what happens here is whenever form is submitted, whatever the value is in that input, it needs to go into the form model, essentially the object that represents values from individual components. So here we can say that the data binding is going to be new task name. Okay, just remember it says new task name. So here let's select our form. So right here, select the form and then go to Codeless. And it's going to be on submit event. And on submit event, notice that we get this new task form data. This is the data that I was talking about, in which there will be a value typed into the input component. That's through that data binding. And in here, what we want to do is we want to save object in backendless task table, and we will create new object. And in this object, there's going to be a name property, and that name property needs to be the value that the user typed into the input component. How do we get to that value? We will get it from the form data. And then this value right here, I think I said new task name. Okay, so what's going on in here? Well, we got the form data. So inside of this form data, there is a value that the user typed in, and that value is available for the property new task name. Why new task name? Because we set up the data binding for our input component. If we go here, see, it says new task name. So that's how we get that value from the form data. So we create new object, we get whatever the user typed into the input component, put it into the object where the property is name, because in the database the column is name, and we save this object in the database. What this accomplishes is it saves the object in the database. However, there are a few things that need to be done on the UI side of things. Specifically, the newly created object needs to be inserted into the list of items, into our to-do list, and also we need to hide the form. So to accomplish this, we're going to do the following. So notice that the save object in backendless has an option to return result. Click this, and we will save the result of this in a variable. You will see why I'm doing it in just a second. I will create a variable. Let's call it new to-do item. We'll set the value of new to-do item to the result of this operation. And in order to add new to-do item, so this will contain that newly created object that is a full, complete object that now exists in the database, we need to add it to our list of objects that is the model of the of our container, of our list of to-do items. For this, I will use the block that is called inList add an item. So we will be adding new to-do item. And then the list to which we will be adding that to-do item is going to be the data model of our to-do list, like this. So this is very straightforward, and what this block does, it's very important. It gets the collection of the to-do objects from the data model of the to-do list, and it adds the newly created object to that collection. And then the rest will happen automatically because the model is updated. And once the model is updated, then the UI re-renders itself to render that new object. Finally, the only thing that is left to be done is to toggle visibility of the form, because at this point the form is not needed. So we can set the visibility to false. Select the form right here and set it to false. That's all. Let's see how that works. So we go to our page, reload it, just so it loads all the latest changes that we make in the UI builder, and let's add a task. Let's call it fix bugs. Press return, and as you can see, fix bugs is now in the list. And if we go back to our database and take a look in there, then fix bugs is also in the database. So we can mark off fix bugs. It will be updated in the database. We can delete it. So all of this functionality works. One thing that we haven't done is notice if I click add task, fix bugs still stays there, and it would be nice if we could just clear out this field. And let's add this logic in UI builder. Let's select our form and go to this code, and in here remember we used new task form data, which is the model of our form that contains the value that is put in there by the input component. Because of that data binding, that data binding is bidirectional, and what that means is that if we clear out that property in the data model of the form, then the field itself will be also cleared out. So notice what I'm going to do is I will set property. We'll use that set property block, and the property will be set in the form data. The property name is new task name, exactly the same as when we retrieve it from the data model. And then the value that's going to go is going to be just an empty string. So what this does is it updates this property in the model of the form, and by doing so it immediately updates it in the input component. Let's see how that works. Reload, and let's say it's going to be fix bugs again. It is there. Click on add task and see now the form is empty. So at this point we have a fully functional to-do application that demonstrates full CRUD, the complete set of all database operations: retrieval, creation, update, and deletion. That's all, guys. This is what I wanted to demonstrate to you. Well, it took a little bit more than 10 minutes, but there were a lot of explanations. I'm actually will record the whole thing just without really any commentary, just going to start to finish with the blank cap. And I have a feeling that I will be able to do it in less than 10 minutes as I was going to. Thank you for watching this video. I do plan to have a lot more videos for sample applications, for various features in UI Builder. There are a lot of features. As you can see, the toolbox has a lot of components, and it's going to be fun. So please let us know what you think. Give this a try. Of course, at this point, Backendless 6 is not released yet, so we will be releasing this video before the actual version is available, sort of as a preview, as a little teaser. but most of the functionality that I have demonstrated will remain exactly as you saw it here in the video. Some things may change, some things will of course get improved because we always strive for improvement. But for the most part, the instructions that I provided today, if you are going to follow them, you should be able to build exactly the same app. Once again, thank you. And as always, happy codeless coding.